Hi all, let's have a look at Game 8 of the World Chess Championship. So Fabiano Caruana playing white against Magnus Carlsen. We have e4, c5, Sicilian defense, knight f3, knight c6, which I was hoping was an attempt to go into the Sicilian Sveshnikov in previous rounds, but we never really found out if it was that or something else like the accelerated dragon. Here we do actually find out, instead of bishop b5, as in earlier games, which I used to call actually the anti-Sveshnikov, we have actually d4, so the open Sicilian test. So which variation will black go into? So g6 would be an accelerated dragon style position, but actually we do have knight f6 and a classic Sicilian Sveshnikov named after old USSR player Evgeny Sveshnikov, and I was a huge fan of this opening when I was a youngster. In fact, I had a funny conversation with Daniel King, who's actually one of the main commentators at the event. We did a dual commentary Sicilian defense video, and he said he used to play the Sicilian Sveshnikov, but then he grew up and started playing the Najdorf. But yeah, I kind of liked the Sveshnikov. I gave it up because of the d5 knight issues. I tended to have a lot of games people knew exactly what to do against it, and yeah, I started moving to other things. So knight db5 with the threat of knight d6 check. So this is a well-known maneuver, d6. And now here, the key move is actually bishop g5. The most theoretical, most trodden is actually bishop g5. When we have this position with b4 being threatened, and white has two main options here, either knight d5 or bishop takes f6. But we don't go into that. We go into an immediate knight d5. And this is more commonly seen as a kind of trap line, especially in Blitz. It has actually quite a cunning trap behind one of the main variations. First of all, white is threatening knight c7 check to fork king and rook. So black does something about that by taking, e takes, and then we have knight b8. This is quite a safe retreat and well trodden. On knight e7, here's the trap for those interested. c4 unleashes a subtle trap. If a6 here, then bang, queen a4 threatens a double check. And this is just winning for white, basically. We'll get a big advantage. If bishop d7, then that's embarrassing because of knight takes d6 checkmate. So this is a well-known trap. If you want to play the Sicilian Sveshnikov, you need to know this line. So not a6, but something like knight g6, white has a small edge. So that's something to be aware of in the knight e7 line. Now here, so knight b8, and in fact, instead of c4, which is the most common move, in fact, we have a4. So this is a little bit surprising instead of c4. c4, for example, the game could run bishop e7, for example, like this, and it should be an even position. The knight can go back to c3, and what's been accomplished is that there's still a c5 break. There's still a pawn majority on the queen side, 4-3 over here. So the c5 break is going to be more effective than usual in this structure. So yeah, c4 is very interesting. On g6, an immediate c5 is also, it seems, tactically possible. Engines love very sharp positions, usually in the open Sicilian. They find fantastic resources. This is one of them where white gets a big advantage here with bishop g5. If f6, bishop takes f6, and then bishop takes d7 check. So it's just a big advantage for white, that line. So yeah, c4 is like a more theoretical test. We have a4. So I guess I was slightly sad, and we're going kind of off the beaten track of what I've played in myself. But let's see, bishop e7. We have now bishop e2. Both sides castle. Knight d7, and what seems to be a little bit of a passive looking move, bishop d2, but it has a lot of venom here potentially in this structure, because there are ideas sometimes of bishop b4 hitting this sensitive, not like that, like this sensitive d6 pawn. So we have f5, very aggressive play from Magnus Carlsen. So great credit to both players for playing this opening, this variation. It's a lot of fun compared to, say, a Berlin or a Petrov. This particular start position, it's kind of a rare visitor in recent years in World Chess Championship matches to have an open Sicilian. But for me, it's like one of the most fun openings going. So this is really incredible stuff that we have this position. So if instead, let's look at a6, then knight a6, knight c3. That would block in the c pawn, so this is kind of undesirable. It's actually the quirky knight a3 is to be preferred, I believe, in this position with c4. It's more in the structural spirit to play for c5 later. With b6, this should be even as well. So, but no, really, knight a3 is the way to play it, I believe. So anyway, the knight wasn't kicked here, so f5. We have now a5, and now the knight is kicked. Now, if it's not kicked, let's say f4. I'm not sure this does black too many favours. It looks aggressive. As long as there's no f3 though, white's king is not in imminent danger here. White could try bishop b4, and say knight b8. And now c4, and say knight a6, trying to not play a6 as an example. This still should be fine for white. I'm not sure this is a great improvement for black in this particular configuration. What is the knight actually doing on a6? So I have to come to c7 later or something. But yeah, this looks as though it should be even. So it's an even position. So a6 immediately. The knight does go to a3, making way for the c pawn. Then we have e4. An alternative has been seen before in a stem game, knight f6. This was actually an ICCF, a correspondence game by email in 2015. And it ended in a win for white. So that was Vol, not Vol, but Voll against Sadashev. And this stem game, well, in correspondence, went like this. Let's have a quick look. So it's one of the rare stem games in the chess-based live books. We might as well just quickly check it out, the flavour of things. The knight so got to a nice central position. The player white was 2-5-7-2, was actually much higher rated than his opponent 2-4-0-1. And yeah, seemed to be getting a dominating grip on the position, all the key squares. So this is kind of a nightmare scenario for black. It does seem as though white has a complete grip on the position. Let's just fast forward through it. From the king coming to e3 as a blockader. Actually, yeah, some of these correspondence games are much more technically interesting sometimes than over the board games, with the luxury of spending a lot of time per move. So eventually white got a winning advantage. Black either resigns or lost on time or something here. Anyway, it looks as though white's doing well with the passed a pawn there. So that's the one stem game, a correspondence game with knight f6 that I see in chess-based live book. But here we see e4. Now it does seem logical, the e5 square, the bishop f6 hitting the diagonal. These are common things to use. We have knight c4, and now knight e5 immediately challenging that knight. So black's not worried about doubled pawns here. White actually plays knight b6, which creates a kind of positional bind on the position. On knight takes e5, this does just seem to serve black to sort of release the bishop outside of its kind of prison. This pawn mass could be very dangerous later with f4 and f3 as a sort of battering ram. The bishop could go potentially, I believe, to d6 and reinforced maybe sometimes with queen e7 to make sure c5 is never happening. That seems to be a comfortable attacking position, and there's things like maybe even rook cliffs later to think about. So actually, yeah, knight b6 seems to be much more positional, and the knight's actually serves as a target for white here for an f4 later, or pretty soon in fact, very soon in fact. So anyway, that was hitting the rook. The rook moved, it was hit just then. That's the only place really to go. And now f4. Now, if the knights just moved back, it does seem a little bit passive, and white could try and just dominate the position, I think. If knight just went back somewhere, then c4, bishop c3, it looks very pleasant indeed. One of the things about this position is that this bishop is kind of locked in behind its own pawn. So if there's no f4 later either, it seems as though white's going to be building up a nice position here. There's even, by the way, here the third rank is clear, so there might even be third rank operations for white later, mixing both queenside and kingside operations. And with this pawn chain as well, another consideration is that sometimes g4 to sort of wrench open the g file is good, especially if you have a bishop here. So there's all sorts of nice strategic plans for white, involving either undermining using the third rank, c4, c5, a wealth of plans to choose from. But black played the en passant, and we have bishop takes f3. And now really a shocker. For me, this is the most shocking game of the World Championship so far. And it injects a lot of fun and drama into this position. Can you guess what Magnus Carlsen played if I give you 5 seconds to pause the video? I hope you haven't seen this game before. It's a shocker. Okay, Nesmetanov would be proud, or tell. g5. Yeah, pawns don't go backwards. It's a commitment. It's like burning bridges, moving pawns, because they don't go backwards. You're never going to go back. The bridge has been burned. Very committal move, very aggressive. So does it promise a major attack against the white king or not? Just let's look at an alternative. f4, c4, bishop f6. Bishop takes this position. Actually seems to be about equal. That's an interesting alternative. f4. Also bishop f6 is interesting. And say c3, then g5 maybe now that white's committed to c3. Surprise it now, because white hasn't committed to c3, so the queenside attack might actually be quite quick with c4 and c5. Black has to be careful, because this not only potentially creates a passed pawn, but also kind of opens up the position. If this pawn ever moves, then there might be exposure along this diagonal as well as potentially this diagonal later. So this is a really committal, brave kind of attacking move in a sense, bridge burning move. So c4 is played. We have f4, and now bishop c3 is played, and it looks as though the undermining c5 is really on the cards. That's kind of not such a stable knight, but it has got the option of playing a check all the time. If there is an issue of c5, and that's actually what happens. Bishop f5, c5. So black uses up the option. If taking to put this on the board, it just simply loses the knight. So black solves the issue here by taking on f3. If we look at bishop f6 for a moment, this can result in c6, which is really unpleasant. Passed pawn supported by the bishop. Really unpleasant position for black. For example, rook e8, b4. This is an interesting continuation, but it just favours white basically. White's going to get a big advantage here with that huge passed pawn on c6. So we have knight takes f3 check, queen takes, and now the immediate d takes c5. On bishop f6 again, this c6 is pretty nasty. It's a nasty passed pawn. And white's just going to end up, here's a nice endgame transition to celebrate the pawn which I analysed, where this position, there's knight a8, this is a comic position, c7, and then bang, rook takes g4 check, taking out the blockade of the pawn and winning, basically material like that, winning the game, winning position. So yeah, it can't be allowed, this c pawn, it has to be taken. And apparently Fabiano was trying to get to d6 to work. It doesn't quite work, d6 immediately. So he's pondering between rook ad1 and rook ae1, it seems. If we look at d6, why doesn't it work? Why isn't it doing anything? Unfortunately, black has queen c6 here, just staying on this diagonal, so there's no nasty checks on d5. And what does white do? Say knight d5, there's this, and what is white doing here? Black might be better there. And if taking, this is no big deal, knight d7, just take here, and then bishop f6 to parry the diagonal, the coordination on g7. That should be even as well. So yeah, d6 doesn't seem to quite work. Queen takes d6 as the move. Not necessarily this way, because then the check is kind of nasty. And look at the coordination of the queen and the bishop on the diagonals, and the piling up of pressure. It just doesn't bear thinking about. If rook f7 has to be played there. So yeah, queen takes d6, I believe. So rook ad1, with the quick idea of d6, and then queen d5 will be winning a piece if black's not careful. Just to put that threat on the board somehow, I'm just with a token move, just to show d6, queen d5 check now will be winning the d6 bishop. So it really has to be blockaded, it seems. This is a major threat. So we have bishop d6. Also, just quickly check out queen e8, d6. This, you might think, this isn't really worth thinking about. A pawn coming to d7 here is very nasty. This actually threatens checkmate. Yeah, showing the g pawn wanted to come back to g5 from g5 to g7, but that would be an illegal move. Pawns don't go backwards. But this kind of scenario, the d pawn crashes through. So yeah, these are all very nasty scenarios. So the blockade, Nimzovich's favourite kind of strategy, is sometimes absolutely tactically essential, as well as positionally desirable. So it's absolutely essential to blockade the pawn. And now here is a critical moment which the world's eyes are on in this position. And the attacking players, I think a number of attacking players have raised eyebrows if you check Twitter, like Nakamura. I think also Judith Polgar horrified by this next move. So all the attacking players are horrified by this next kind of lame looking move, which I don't think would be the first on their priority list here. It will be to try and get somehow to the black king, I believe, instinctively. And for me, I thought queen h5 as well, but I couldn't quite make it work. But there is some amazing mechanisms to check out here. So the lame move, I wonder if you can guess it, that Fabiano played in this position. h3. It just doesn't fit for me personally. This is a sort of higher level, attacking spirit. It doesn't fit for me this into the style of the position. So it turns out queen h5. I thought this looked good, but I didn't really see during the live, how this works necessarily. But let's say queen h5. So what does black actually do here? Now, probably the best technical move for black is to play queen e8. There's not too much of a weakness of the last move with queen e8. It does weaken the d6 a bit, so knight c4 is slightly more effective. But it does parry the pressure, and it offers a pawn to neutralise the pressure. Now, for example, queen takes g5 check, queen g6. This might be black's best continuation. If the knight comes back, yes, that's a concern. But we have an opposite colour bishop scenario, which might be able to be drawn, given the opposite colour bishops. This makes it harder to win because the blockade potential is much higher when there's opposite colour bishops. The blockade on the light squares should be usually much easier to achieve. So this might actually be, even though the engines might think this is a big advantage, this looks, okay, it might only be a more technical advantage without actually being exploitable too much. So that could actually be the best practical defense here, to play queen e8. In which case Fabiano doesn't have to lose sleep over it. This does seem to at least simplify the position, get the queens off. So basically get the queens off. If rook f7, then knight c4 is pretty dangerous. For example, the knight coming into e5, and this looks very sore for black. This kind of position looks like a nightmare for black. White has a big advantage. On bishop g6 instead, Intriguingly, and the players might have dismissed this position with queen h6, which, yes, it threatens checkmate, but black has rook f7. After rook fe1, there's queen f8, and it seems, again, this offer of a pawn might be an advantage to white, though. So that's still dangerous. This position, even with queen h6, still seems dangerous. However, there's an even stronger idea here, actually, on bishop g6, which is to actually drop the queen back to h3. And you'll notice this bishop left behind a kind of weakness of the last move. When it moved here, it left behind the e6 square, and the queen is now looking at queen e6 check. And one of the things about the e6 square is that it's not just the queen. A rook can later potentially pile up to come into e6 to exert lateral pressure. And say black plays bishop f5, white has an amazing move in this position, which casts doubt on black's defensive capabilities here. Can you see what white can play? Okay, g4. Yeah, this is really, really dangerous stuff. If f takes g3, then rook takes f5 is just winning material. There's nothing for black there. If bishop e4, then queen h6 threatens queen e6 check, picking up the bishop, as well as queen g7 checkmate, of course. So if rook f7, then here, this is getting nasty for black. In fact, after this resourceful king f2, it looks as though black's getting done over here in this position, basically. That lateral pressure, yeah, knight c8 threatens now knight e7 checkmate. This is just absolutely crushing stuff, showing how all the black weaknesses are being exploited one by one after g4. So this looks absolutely horrible. So yeah, these positions are looking very, very shaky on queen h8. So it seems as though queen e8 might be the best try. So bishop g6, there's queen h3 or queen h6. Yeah, very, very dangerous looking stuff. There's also a very tempting move here in the form of knight c4 as well. For example, g4 queen f2 looks as though it's asking for trouble with g3 or f3. If we look at f3 here, takes this position, looks as though white should be having a very nice position as well, at least with a small edge here. This looks very dangerous for black as well. If we look at this again with g3, then queen d2, just allowing black to have a pawn there shields the white king, and this looks kind of promising as well. However, basically white might only have a small edge here, because yeah, that's kind of a dangerous back row here a little bit. So the preference, it seems, was queen h5, but maybe in the event, you know, Magnus would have played queen e8, so maybe it's not something to lose too much sleep over on this occasion, possibly. So anyway, h3, it does come up with Stockfish 9 as one of the top 3 choices, at least on mine with limited analysis. So it does have some pluses going for it to stop the aggressive intent of g4 in many variations. So maybe in a theoretical sense, yeah, queen h5 would have given, or in a practical sense, more chances to win. But anyway, queen e8 was played. And now, I mean, Magnus might have been relieved emotionally if he's getting queen g6. This always looks a bit nifty. It reminds me of one of the 1972 Fischer-Spassky games, Fischer playing black with getting a queen to g6. It bears down the center, and it also supports g4. It seems like a very nice attacking maneuver to aim for a queen on g6, and it also helps protect the bishop, which is asked of black to protect the bishop. Knight c4, queen g6. And yes, it seems as though this isn't so much of a problem now, this position. Except black is threatening g4. That is a little bit of a problem actually for white. So Fabiano snaps off on d6. Queen takes d6 and tries to undermine the pawns. That's actually taken. G takes h4. On g4 here, then this doesn't seem that nice for black. There might be some problems here for black. White, even though it's opposite colour bishops, this looks troublesome compared to playing g takes h4. So we have queen takes, the queens come off, and now a very strong move, h5, which provides a peg support for bishop g4. Now, if white plays rook takes h4, then bishop g4, and the rook's kind of stranded. This is unpleasant. In fact, white would have to resort to an artificial looking move, rook h1, to start solving the problems, but again, it's kind of an even position. So anyway, white really doesn't want to have to do that. So we have actually rook e1, bishop g4, we have rook f6. Yeah, bishop g4 unveiled an attack on, after rook e1, bishop g4 unveils an attack on the rook. We have actually rook f6, that's taken, king f7. So we got opposite coloured bishops. White takes on h4, we have rook e8, check. Now on rook takes e8, this doesn't seem as though anyone's going to win this with opposite coloured bishops, basically. It looks as though black can set up a perfect blockade on the light squares. So we have rook f1 check, and there is one final trick about to be witnessed after check. d6. White is actually threatening rook takes and then d7, supported by the bishop. But Magnus gets behind the pawn, the Tarrasch rule, to the rescue. So rook takes g4 is harmless now. So if he had played c4, then yes, that would be unfortunate. Rook takes g4 and then d7. You can see that the pawn is supported by the bishop. King can't help. That just loses material. Just put that on the board there. So d6, we have rook d2, rook g5, and the game ended here. It was actually agreed drawn here. If c4, if it carried on with c4, as an example, rook c5, rook takes, black might be able to play b6, liberating that kind of bind there. And we have a really drawish position. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this analysis in one of my favourite openings when I was younger, the Sicilian Sveshnikov. I beat some good players with it once, like Marizenko, Lozbet Masters, many years back. Okay, so very exciting opening to try out. If you enjoyed this game video, then please click on the top left box, which should appear shortly, to become a member at chessworld.net. You can play against other YouTubers. You can also check this game analysis and other games from the improved menu, learn from the masters. Click YouTube order button, and some of that analysis will be updated from time to time. Comments, questions, donations, see the description box. Like, share, subscribes with the notification bell. Really welcome and appreciated. Thank you very much.